Cheers, super listeners. Welcome to our second podcast in the series supporting our upcoming book, The Super User Revolution. So today we're touching on chapter 1, and that's the drivers at work, where we're going to explore end users because you have to start with this. Because, let's face it, without end users, you have no super users. So I'm here once again with my friend and co-author, Michael Doane. Hello, Michael.
And hello, Ginger. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us for this second podcast. Again, right now you may not understand the title, Drivers at Work. You're going to understand it in just a moment now. I'm going to begin with a little nostalgia for a lot of you people who probably weren't even born yet, but I was a CIO back in 1982. And I was going around the building where I'd been hired, and I found a room where there were people doing something that I thought people didn't do anymore. And boy, was I surprised. What it was the data entry room, where 3 poor women were taking forms that people had filled out and keying them in to the system. I immediately told them that their jobs were obsolete. I would find them new jobs, which I did within the space of a week throughout the company. And we returned and took all of these crazy applications that included people filling out forms by hand and tendering them. And therefore created complexity to the end user burdens, because these were one activity end users, and the notion of horizontal business process would not appear for another 10 years. Now this moves us up all to 1992, and there were twin revolutions going on. The first was horizontal business process, by which business processes were viewed as complete, and they could cross departments very, very easily from beginning to end. And that led to integrated enterprise applications, by which applications were no longer single activities, but multiple activities across a horizontal plane, which was a greater burden on what we called end users. Now, at this point, end users could help each other out in a very informal peer-to-peer fashion, like, David, tell me again, how do I close a sales order if it has this kind of an order date to it, etc. And you would be able to ask help and get help from peers, but it was not formal, and we did not have what we learned we were going to need, and that was a super user. So, with this revolution, Ginger, did this all happen in 1992?
Of course it did. No, heck no, it did not by a long shot. So back then, super users were a thing, but they were really a project thing. It was really a project resource. So every time a project came up, we needed people from the business. So we would go snatch them out of the business, throw them into the war room. Remember the war room, Michael? Or many of...
It was always the war room.
So we would...
It was never the room. I never found one that was called the room where all the really good new things are taking place.
No, people did try to remake that, but my goodness, the war room. So yeah, we would take them, snatch them out of the business, lock them in the room, feed them a lot of junk food until they gained about 40 pounds and finished with all their testing, and the project went live, and we would throw them back to the business, and hopefully they would go back to the business and continue that super activity. And I think that was a pipe dream for people. And there were those that thought that that was actually going to happen. And it never did happen. And if you fast forward to today, we're still doing that. And so really, if you look at the super user revolution, that's what that's all about, is why are we doing this insanity still? And so back then, we had the end users, and the super users, of course, were tightly connected to the end users. And so what we did for the end users is we just did point and click. So follow steps 1 through 10, and ta-da! It works every time, right? In the lab, right? Lab rat? That's the way I feel about it. So if I fast forward today, everything around us is so very different, and everyone agrees to that. But the end user and our support and our training for them, I don't feel it's really evolved. I mean, we've danced all over the place with throwing things at them, but I mean, holistically, I don't really feel like it's evolved. And there was this growing sentiment that we don't really need to train them anymore because all of the software and these solutions and what we call apps and cloud, those are funny words, right, Michael? Especially cloud. Cloud.
Yeah, I love the word cloud or the term cloud in our world. And I ask people who are not in the world of information technology, what is the cloud? And they shake their heads and I say, it's the internet, dummy.
But really, in all seriousness, there's this sentiment that these new apps and this cloud and all of this, this very easy to use stuff and these people coming into the workforce who have been using apps their whole life, that we don't really need to train them because all of it is so intuitive. And more than once, I have heard management say things like, we have really smart people. They just pick stuff up and they go with it. Michael, come on. I know you're going to weigh in on this. You're probably levitating out of your seat right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, yes. What is a user? I've never liked the term user. I mean, from the very beginning. So, let's begin. The point is that these are the people who, quote, use software. But you and I both know, and so do many, many other people, Ginger, that they do so much more than that. And we're going to get into the so much more in just a moment. But also, please note, audience, that there are only two industries in the world that refer to their ultimate clients as users. And one of those industries is illegal. Let's think that for a moment. Okay. In point of fact, what happens is the whole notion of a user or the function of a user is too often culturally downgraded in companies, when in point of fact, these are the people, and these people alone, who drive business process fulfillment. Everyone else around them, while important, is relatively a tourist. Only users drive business process fulfillment. And that's why we refer to them often as drivers. I even have had clients over the last 7 or 8 years who have rebranded within their firms the term end users to drivers or process drivers. That's happened on about 4 occasions, and I've been very pleased. Anyway, I've made these arguments quite often to senior management around my client world, in public speaking, while doing consulting and the like. The trouble was the senior managers were simply saying that, look, end user competency, Michael, is not our issue. It's just software. They'll figure it out. Don't worry. And it was only when I began to demonstrate how much these companies were losing, and invisibly losing, due to poor user skills and a lack of support, did I begin to gain their attention. Just talking about, listen, you lose a large sales order because the super user isn't super yet, has no support, and has a problem getting an order in. Time goes by, the sales order is lost. That's money out the door. Posting the wrong delivery address, that's money out the door. One of my favorites is a story that you can read in the book. I'll keep it short, but Alice had a job reviewing her company's biggest orders. Only the big orders went through Alice, and it was up to her to approve them and move them along down the business process chain, but she didn't know the business process chain because she hadn't been taught her role in a business process, and ended up holding up all of the company's largest orders by up to a full day and costing them a real bomb. There are more personal stories, like the one Ginger originally told me.
Yeah, so this is the story of an English couple, to take you out of the IT space, who got online and they booked their flights to Birmingham. Well, guess what? They intended to go to the England version and found themselves with tickets to Birmingham, Alabama. Oops. Now that would be a big mistake. So you can see the mistakes that can be made by someone that doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't know the proper data to enter. And we talked about this in our last podcast, Michael. And I mean, you can come up with story after story. I would imagine you listeners out there, you probably have your own set of stories as you're sitting listening to this that you know has happened within your company. And one of the big problems that I see is that these errors that happen and get corrected, they don't get aggregated up into a story of why did these happen and are there interventions that we need to take into account to prevent these things from happening. It's just this big pile under the rug of money that has seeped out. And I find it terrible. And so I think that there's a lot that can be done about that, Michael.
There is, and I want to take a little of the burden off the senior management and their neglect, because it's somewhat understandable. Do remember that the software vendors tend to downplay the importance and the burden of end user training, as they tend to downplay the importance and burden of the consulting required to implement the software. They tend to claim that the software is flexible and intuitive, and that its utilization can be easily trained. This is quite false, especially in the world of large-scale enterprise applications, SAP, Oracle, even Microsoft. There's a wonderful book, by the way, just in passing, that I strongly recommend to any of you who care about usability of this software, written by a man named Harold Hambrose, Hambrose. I'll just give you that. If you Google on his name, you'll find his excellent book, which is called A Wrench in the System.
Yeah, that's a good one.
He's an elegant writer, and you'll be hearing more from him in future podcasts, either directly or at least through quotes, because he is a full-time design specialist in the world of enterprise applications. And he's the one who also gave me the phrase about the users being half of them being illegal.
He is quite clever.
He is a quite clever guy, but he also is very good at getting to the nub of things. He also makes the point that the reason the software can be so unusable is because the programmers owe their loyalties to the code and not to you. So the software vendors downplay this importance. Both the software and systems integrator tend to fob off end-user training onto the customer, who very seldom grasps the complexity and criticality of this aspect, because they haven't had the pleasure of listening to a podcast with me and Ginger.
Well, and I want to dip into, before we close this out, I want to dip into the complexity issue, or as some people say, simplicity, because I've heard, and it hasn't just been recently, I've heard over the years people saying, well, you shouldn't have to train people. This software should be just so intuitive that you shouldn't have to train people. And I think that's absurd, but, I've had plenty of people, debate that with me. But the way I describe it is that this software represents business functions according to what's happening within a job role. And so the job roles themselves, are they simple? Are they intuitive? Are they easy to transfer person to person? Let me go through a little scenario, and I'm going to read this to you because I think this is really impactful. So next week, I want you to go get your warehouse manager with 30 years of experience, and then go get one of your whiz kid financial analysts from Carnegie Mellon and switch their assignments. So tell the financial whiz that his new role is to oversee deliveries, approve stock transfers, manage inventory on 46,567 spare parts, and provide purchase recommendations based on item turnover statistics, and more. And then tell your warehouse manager that you need an updated cash flow analysis in 6 separate currencies. And by the way, we're not going to provide any training because these jobs are so intuitive that, you'll be able to figure it right out with no mistakes. So you see, Michael, it doesn't make sense to me.
Nor I, and nor others. And again, while a lot of what is intuitive, that having end users work the way they work without super users or a more formalized support structure, we've figured out that that's really not a very good practice. So, Ginger, let's kind of go one after the other. We'll take turns on this bullet point list.
You read my mind.
We're gonna close with telling you why basic users need the support, if not the love, of a super user within the context of a vibrant super user network. I'll take the first one, Ginger, and it's because you, the user, adapt. You inherited the system you use without any input, known laughingly in our world as user acceptance testing, which Harold Hambrose, by the way, calls an Orwellian concept. And no matter how unusable that software may be, you make it work.
Great. You are visible. So in many cases, you're the only person that your company has contact with. You are visible. In many cases, you are the only person in your company who has contact with the customer, the supplier, the accountants, the marketers, or you can fill in the blanks on these. So yours is the only face they see, and yours is the only voice they hear. So customer contact satisfaction is more in your hands than anyone else's in the company.
Was that one there a surprise to you, people listening in? Because I can tell you, when I say something like that to a manager, director, senior vice president, or unfortunately C-level person, it is a surprise to them. Also, this is not a surprise to them, but it's fraught with risk. You, the user, do damage control. You know there's a little bitty switch right there in the lower left-hand corner of the screen will cause customer turmoil if checked.
Don't check it. Don't check it.
Don't do it.
You, the end user, you have flow control. So in a system that's a real-time and highly connected and integrated system, data accuracy and timeliness of transactional processing is absolutely critical to business success. And Michael talked earlier about money, the impact on your financials.
Yep. Also, you know where the bones are buried. You know the details of why you do not do a particular activity, why you do that little detail, and must do that little detail, but don't do that one again. Do not check that little box in the corner of the screen.
Don't do it.
Only on pain of death. And when the business process design geniuses think it's time to tinker with the process, only you who have lived through the process can describe all of the moving parts in detail from a practical and experienced user point of view.
And you, the end user, have process improvement ideas. I've seen this time and time and time again. You know what works well, you know what doesn't work well, right there on the front lines. You know when something's clunky, and if only you had a platform and a voice. I've seen this time and time again, and this is so important. Don't shut down your end users. If they're not telling you about things that aren't working or things that are clunky, it's because they feel shut down and they don't have a voice. So from my standpoint, Michael, it's time they get a voice, and we intend to give them a voice through the super user revolution, addressing the rise of the super user.
One last little suggestion to you. If you're getting a manager or director, somebody saying, well, what's the problem with the software? It's intuitive. Anybody can figure it out. Sit them down in front of the screen and have them process some orders.
That's a great one, Michael. That's a great action item for everyone to take after this podcast. So I appreciate everyone getting on. We've had a blast with these. I want you to continue to follow us. We're posting these to LinkedIn and Twitter. And we've got a YouTube channel for SAP Insight. We're posting them up there. We want you to engage. We want you to tell us what you think. Give us your comments. We'd love to hear them as we're finishing out the book. Those will be very inspirational for us and very helpful for us. So take your day and go be super.